Okay.
All right, well, let's, like we were saying, maybe we could just start talking, but you could talk a little bit about the difficulties that the council faced. One thing, though, remember that when you squeeze that cord, the sound picks up.
I'm sorry. When you squeeze it, the sound picks up.
Yeah.
Okay. The difficulties the council faced. The original application that was filed with FERC didn't contain a request to control the license. It just contained a request for a substantial increase on the annual rental rate. Once we started pursuing control of the license, that brought up certain things that weren't anticipated. FERC had an obligation to...
Hold on a second. Melanie, you can't be talking during the interview because it picks up on the microphone. Okay?
Okay, should I start over? Yeah. Okay, obstacles. I don't know how to start this.
You're doing great.
Oh, okay. Some of the obstacles that we encountered when negotiating was that the original application that was filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission didn't specifically request control of the license. It requested a substantial increase in the annual rental rate, and that was supposed to be substantiated or disputed by the various parties. After the process started, the council, determined that it would be in the best interest of everyone to go after control of the license. And at that point in time, I think that triggered a different evaluation by FERC. They were to determine that if we did control the license, that was in the public's best interest. So it was kind of shed a different light on it. So then we faced different tests, things that weren't anticipated when we originally filed the application. We had to prove that we had a market for the power, which we didn't. There were numerous attempts made to market the power, to find a buyer for the power, but all of those failed because if you didn't have control of the license, how could you market the power? If you didn't have control of the license, how could you go out and enter into a wheeling contract with anyone? All of the negotiations that were attempted were based on some sort of supposition that you would eventually control it. But nobody would enter into any sort of a real business deal with us. Plus, there were questions about whether or not we had the capability to control the dam, manage it, market it in a manner that wouldn't harm the public interest. And so there were it's kind of like the tribe's credibility was questioned. We tried to counter that, stating that we would hire the experts that would perform all of that for us, but that wasn't enough. In one attempt to prove a market for the power, we influenced the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs to come out and make some sort of commitment that the Bureau of Indian Affairs would purchase the power sufficient to supply the reservation needs. That was a good thing, but it didn't solve our problems. At the same time, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was continually advising us to negotiate with Montana Power. And they were continually encouraging us to go back, and they'd put all these time frames on us, like go back for another week, go back for another 10 days, because they knew that our case wasn't as airtight as we would have liked it to be. So here we were pursuing avenues, trying to find markets for the power, but at the same time we were being encouraged to negotiate, so we knew that we weren't in a real favorable position. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission continually reminded us that this case had been litigated more than any other case ever. Every time we went in for an annual rental increase, it was litigated. So it was a difficult situation.
Do you think that a lot of people don't really What kind of comments have you gotten or heard wind of that lead you to want to make this point?
Well, it's that process, the negotiations and the fight for it, control of the dam, that was a really painful process for a lot of people. And I think there are still some wounds today that are left over from that process. I think that process changed a lot of lives. People, will even come up to me today and tell me how I erred or how the council erred and how we should have done more, we should have done something differently. We could have got more money. We should have let go of the license. That we settled too soon. There's 3,000 opinions on it, but it just wasn't as easy as it looked from the outside. You were requested or required to go into this room every day and negotiate on rent, negotiate on time of takeover, negotiate on environmental conditions, negotiate on the low-cost block of power that's given to FIP, negotiate on when they would start training tribal members to take over. So it wasn't a simple matter. And people just, I don't think that the average person on the street understands that, nor do they understand the struggle that the council went through as a group in sincerely trying to make the best deal for the tribes.
So you mentioned there being wounds that still today are sore for some people, and I guess those arose from the divisions and what course the tribe should take on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Would you want to talk about that at all?
The divisions? Well, early in the process, when the application was filed, the goal there was merely a substantial increase in the rent. That's my view of the situation. You can talk to somebody who worked in filing the application and they'll indicate something different, but the application was merely out for an increase in rent. At the time the application was filed, there were certain people controlling the process, certain people on the council. And then there was a turnover, of course, in council members or administrative staff, and there were certain members who thought that control of the license was more important from the philosophy of trying to control your own destiny, control your own property. Any other landowner takes it for granted that they can rent their property to whoever they want. And here we are being told that we have to rent it to Montana Power. But so that we were faced with the original license requesting one thing. Now there was a changeover. A certain percent thought that control of the license was more important. A faction of the membership supported buyout by Montana Power for a certain per capita, that they would get the majority of the proceeds of the money, that the government, the tribal government, wouldn't have any money to operate on. It's my own personal opinion that those people were short-sighted, that there were certain benefits that exist today because the government receives the payment. Had those individuals received that payment, we wouldn't, as a tribe, have a lot of the services that we have today. So there were all sorts of different factions, people wanting to sell out, people just wanting a big rental rate, and other people wanting control of the license. Those people are still here today, and they still, believe that something different should have happened.
So those divisions were rooted in a basic differing philosophies or sensibilities.
It's just like today, every time the tribes go through an annual budget process, there's a portion of the membership that thinks it's appropriate. There's a portion that wants the money to go someplace else, or a portion that wants the services to go someplace else. I believe that the settlement that was achieved was in the best interests of everybody. You can't please everybody. But I think you can try to police a majority or put the services where you think they're best needed.
What was your personal take on why the fight for Kerr Dam was important?
Why it was important? I think back to that time period in my life, and the only way that I can describe it is it was kind of like a mission to me. I mean, it consumed every part of me. I couldn't think of anything more important than controlling the license. It was like controlling your own destiny or having a say in how your life will be managed in the future. It was a simple choice for me because to me it seemed so right. I know other people don't view it that way, but it was just a matter of taking hold, taking control, doing something that somebody else takes for granted, that we had to fight for.
As long as we're talking about that whole negotiations and things, how would you characterize what MPC was trying to do through that whole process? How was it dealing with that?
Of course they wanted to control the license. And of course they wanted to pay the lowest rental rate possible. The negotiations were cordial, I can remember only one time when it really got hot and everybody walked away from the table. But I mean, they had their own interests in mind, and for the stockholders or the company or whatever. But they wanted to keep the license and they wanted the annual rental rate low. They're not stupid. But I don't have any really bad feelings about the negotiations personally. About the way MPC treated us or the way we responded to them. Certain tribal members who were involved in the negotiations at the time now come back and say that the negotiation process was wrong from the beginning, that you should have never negotiated with the principals in the room. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that because the tribal council is charged with the authority and the responsibility. The council has the right to obligate the use of tribal property. And they also have the responsibility that goes along with that to try to make the best deal possible. And how could the council reasonably assure themselves that was the best deal possible if they weren't involved in the negotiations? But they were cordial. And we wanted the highest rate we could get for rent, and we wanted control of the license. And they didn't want it. They were under the same gun we were, because the judge would continually say, go back, talk to them, negotiate. Every time that we reached a break point and we went back to the judge, he'd say to negotiate. He didn't want to make the final decision with it.
So it was your sense that judge was even-handed?
I think that personally, it's just my opinion, we could have done a lot worse. He had numerous opportunities to throw our case out, our license out, when we didn't have a market for the power, when we couldn't prove a wheeling agreement, when half of the state of Montana passed resolutions supporting Montana Power Company's application. Nobody supported ours. The public interest test as far as public school districts, counties, whatever, everybody was opposed to the tribes taking over. I mean, I think he could have thrown our application out. I think that he was probably even-handed, you know.
So do you feel that he had an understanding of the tribe's position and its history?
No, I don't think he had that. Well, I think he had an understanding of the vulnerable position we were in. I mean, of course he knew how weak our case was. But I don't think that he understood what brought us to that point, nor do I think he understood the history, nor could he understand the bitterness on some tribal members' parts that every time we went in for a rent increase that we had to litigate it when that was supposed to be automatic by the terms of the license. He understood part of it, but he couldn't understand all of it. You know, nor could I think he really understand what was at stake for those members that really believed in getting the license. You know, he couldn't understand that.
What was at stake for those members?
I think our future, you know, that this was our chance to take over something that we should have been controlling long ago, something that in my opinion was unjustly taken from us years ago, you know. I think the future of the tribe is tied up with the license and the income and how we choose to manage it in the future. And even if we choose to make a mess of it, it should be through our own actions, not through somebody else's. I mean, the tribal members in the future have a right to do with that as they see fit. That's tribal property. That's nobody else's.
Do you think that there were hearings around the area when the judge came out here? And I happened to be away at that time, but my understanding is that certain elders testified at those things and gave some fairly powerful testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any sense of whether or not the judge heard what they were saying or was affected by it?
I think he was affected by it. You mentioned the hearings, and I think the hearings were wonderful. And I did a lot of work in the hearing process, and that's not why I think they were wonderful. But we had it set up, you know, we looked for members who were willing to go out and testify, and we tried to ensure that we had adequate coverage at each hearing, be it Pablo, Kalispell, or Missoula. And, you know, we carpooled. There was a lot of effort made by a lot of people to make a showing at the hearing, because while we were possibly weak in the application and everything, but we could make a showing there. And I think he heard what was said at the hearings. He couldn't help but hear it. The hearings were overwhelmingly in our favor. You know, I remember after the Missoula hearing, the last hearing, that Dean Conklin came up and he congratulated me on how well the tribes did through the hearings. And he made a comment that if they could only do so well when Public Service Commission held hearings, and you know, that they had often tried to organize efforts like that and they had never accomplished that, and Montana Power considered our showing, you know, that was our victory, you know. So I think he heard what was said there. I mean, we had young people, old people, you know, just as our tribe is a mix of complexions, eye colors, history, culture, language, whatever. Every base was covered.
Is there any testimony that sticks out in your mind that you remember in particular?
Mm-hmm. I think some of the people who gave the most eloquent testimony, or maybe the most that really made an impression, were some of the Elmo elders up in Kalispell. That was the most touching to me, those people spoke from their heart. I don't want to single anyone out individually. I just think that community and those people did an excellent job. They made a real effort, and they were sincere in what was said. Are all these on your list?
What's next?
Okay, what's on your list?
Well, as long as we're still in the 1980s.
Right.
Maybe you could...
Am I blowing it?
What?
Am I blowing this so
You're
far?
doing great.
Oh.
You're doing great.
Right.
Maybe to talk a little bit about the vigil committees. And,
Okay.
what they were and what you thought of them.
Mm-hmm. The vigil. I think that the Kerr vigil was important. I supported it. I can remember a number of individuals who were on the committee who worked really, really hard. Joe and Pete Phillips come to mind. Jerry Knoll comes to mind. Bearhead. Marie Blixt comes to mind. Marge Blixt, excuse me. She did a good job. But I mean, there were all these people who were tribal members, who were sincere, who were committed to the tribes gaining control of the license. They saw the value of that in the future. They weren't necessarily out for money today, but control in the future. The way I saw the purpose of the vigil was it was at a point when the judge was considering everything that had transpired to date. The time clock was ticking. The property that the vigil was held on was tribal property. I had to call Montana Power, ask permission to be there, which was just insane that it's your own property. At first they didn't give us permission, then eventually they did, under certain conditions, and I'm, about maybe times or sanitation or cars or something like that. But but everybody wanted to be there. They wanted to go out there. They wanted to camp. They wanted to have a community gathering. They wanted everybody who was dedicated to the cause to be there and to be together, kind of a showing of support for what we were doing at that point in time, and to demonstrate to the public that we were still committed, that we weren't just giving up. And it was a time when the members were united, teepees were put up, meat was cooked, prayers were said, songs were sung. It was wonderful, I thought. I mean, it came from the bottom up. The members that were there because they wanted to be. They contributed time, effort, food, materials, a ride. It was a sincere event.
Let's see. How do you feel about how things finally turned out? Settlement, in other words. How do you feel about it?
I think the settlement turned out very well, given the circumstances that we were in. I think that to me the true victory was eventually controlling the license. Plus the annual rental rate, it was a substantial increase over what we had been getting before, 2.6 in comparison to 9 million. There were certain aspects built into the license, such as the need for Montana Power to train tribal members X years before we take over. That was good. The issue of the environmental conditions that are imposed on the license being delayed to a future date, that was good, pending additional studies. I thought I thought it was the best that could be expected. I considered it a victory. Other individuals didn't view it in the same manner, but I thought it was a victory after lots of hard work. Everybody says you should have held out for more money. You know, you should have let go of the license. But I think we, as a tribe, I think we won that one.
Well, that settlement covers the next 50 years from the time it was reached. And are there steps or precautions that the tribe needs to take? In other words, what do they need to anticipate in the coming years?
Well, I think that that we need to keep in the back of our minds that there is a time frame associated with it, that we do need to develop some expertise in the power business. The tribe's contracting Mission Valley Power under 93-638 process, that's a step in the right direction. Hopefully by the time we take over the license to Kerr, we'll be still managing the distribution facility that serves the reservation, and the power that's produced there maybe can be, the majority of it can be utilized locally. But we do need to develop the expertise in the marketing end of power. We need to train tribal members to be able to take the positions out there, to take a lead role in every bit of that, so that we don't have to have hired guns that do it for us. You know, we need to do some planning for the future. My answers are they short or are they long? Are they rambling?
No, they're very concise, actually, compared to especially a lot of people who've interviewed that tend to go way off the subject.
Am I going off?
No.
No. Okay.
Feel free to do it more if you want.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sitting here going, okay. Then ask me number 2 again. No. No.
Let's see. There's going to be a lot of money coming to the tribes. $9 million a year adjusted for cost of living increases, and then the full value of whatever the tribes can get for the electricity generated by the dam. How would you like to see that used? And attached to that, are there ways in which misuses of that income could end up making things worse in terms of cultural survival here, or tribal sovereignty, or other issues? Is it? Okay.
Can we ask it again?
Let's ask it on the next tape.
Okay, let me think about that.
All right.
Money.
Okay. You can tell we're just going to bag the rest of this tape.
I make such faces. I feel so stupid. Am I making stupid faces, Tom?
Oh, it's 3:15.
Oh, let's just go. If I'm a little bit late, that's okay.
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 Thanks, Teresa. Okay. Go ahead with the next tape.
Do I look stupid, Tom?
No, you don't look stupid, and you don't sound stupid.
Okay. God, they'll go, who is that?
Smart, and you sound smart.
Right, who's that foolish person? Right. Who's that stupid person that screwed us out of, no, $20 million.
Once they say that, hell with them.
That's right. That's right.
Your grandchildren will still love you.
Oh, right. I hope so. Right.
That's Jolene is talking to Speed Salish.
Oh, yes, speed Salish.
I didn't mean to yell at you there, Melanie.
I didn't know what was going on.
Now, does he put a tape in there?
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't have to come
Yours
on.
is all coming in there. I can show
Oh.
you when we're done.
Oh, wait. Here, don't scrunch the little mic. Shh.
feel like coming
Is
out?
everybody in favor of it so far? Do a lot of people think we really screwed up